Y'all been around for a while. You know that Chris and I have been hyping up for well over a year and a half now that we are going to overland internationally. And some of you guys still may not know what that means. Essentially, it means traveling in a vehicle around the world.
That's overlanding, traveling in a vehicle.
That's more of a term that's been used in like Australia and Europe for a long time. In America, it's just not kind of picking up that term. But that's a fancy term for we're going on a major road trip. And there is one guy who has been incredibly helpful and inspiring as we have navigated learning so much about this crazy process of shipping our truck camper to Argentina in the coming weeks. And that is Dan of The Road Chose Me. Oh. And if you've never heard of Dan, he's got a YouTube channel. He's got books. I mean, he is such an interesting dude, very experienced. What can you say about Dan?
Dan is from Australia, which originally, which means he has a super cool accent. But
he just sounds like adventure.
He does sound like adventure. He has traveled all over Africa. He's traveled all over South America, in North America, in Australia. He has done this overland. He is like, I don't want to, because he's not very old, but I'm going to call him the grandfather of overlanding because he's been doing it for so long.
He's way ahead of us. I think he's been overlanding for 15 years now. Before social media was even social media. I mean, he was doing this without apps to tell him where to camp at night. Yeah. I mean, he is like OG overlanding.
Dan has been uploading videos to YouTube for a very long time, and he is this amazing resource for people wanting to ship their vehicles internationally and do this whole overlanding thing.
But even if that's not what you're interested in, even if you're not interested in actually doing that yourself, his videos are so fun, and you see a whole different side of the world that you never will probably see. I mean, he's gone to places that I don't know that I will ever step foot in. Like, I will probably never step in to the DRC, the Congo, in Africa. I mean, that's one of the most dangerous places on earth. And he goes there and he shows what it's like. And he has incredible stories. So if you have a little bit of like the wanderlust bug, and maybe you're at home or maybe you are dreaming of going to some of these places, just go watch his videos. But today, I think today's episode will be a great introduction to maybe help you understand like what Chris and I are about to get into, where we're going and what we're doing. And also you get to hear some of Dan's incredible stories. So let's just get to it.
Well, hang on. Before we get to it, please leave a review for this podcast. It helps us out. Sarah hates when I ask for this, but we have to ask for it. So there it is.
And now the episode.
Today we are joined by our good friend Dan. Dan is doing something and has been doing something for a very long time that has inspired us. We're getting ready to go on our own journey, and partly because we've watched Dan's content online, we've seen his stories. So Dan is this overlander, and we'll explain what overlanding is because it's not a really well-known term, but if you've been around for a while, you know that we are about to go on our adventure, but Dan has been doing this adventure for a long time. So Dan, thanks for being a part of the show, and thanks for being here, man.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's a real pleasure, and I'm really looking forward to just chatting. It feels like we're just hanging out together, and it's great.
I know, this is great. So we met you for the first time at Overland Expo, and I wish we'd had longer to talk because we have so many questions, and I know we have a lot in common, but maybe for the people who aren't familiar with overlanding, could you give them a brief overview of what is overlanding, and also who are you and what you, that's a really loaded question. Maybe I should have
Who are
one.
You? What do you stand for? Like, yeah. So.
Let's start with who are you, Dan? Tell everybody what you've been up to, where you're from, that kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, my name is Dan, and I grew up in Australia, kind of like in a small farming town. And I went to university in Melbourne. And then I moved over to Canada and started having kind of all these adventures in the mountains just on the weekends while I was working as an engineer. And somewhere along the line, I realized that sitting at a desk just wasn't making me happy, and it wasn't kind of fulfilling. And I looked at my coworkers who were in their 60s, and I realized that was me. Or like all I had to do was sit at a desk for the next 40 years, and that's what I was going to turn into. And I said, whoa, that's really terrifying. What else can I do? Like, that's not the life that I want to have for the next 40 years. And I'd always been fascinated by travel and going new places and meeting new people. And so I loaded all of my camping gear into a little Jeep that I had, a little two-door, and I drove up to Alaska for a summer. I quit my job, I sold all my stuff, and I drove up to Alaska, and I just camped along the way. I cooked all my own food in a little camp stove, and I just started having adventures. I would go hiking and meet people and get invited to gold mines and just random kind of life. and it was captivating. It was enthralling. It was amazing. And then someone said, well, you should go down to Mexico for the summer so you can skip winter. And I bought a map of Mexico and all of Central America was attached. And then I was like, wait a minute, like what stops me driving to Guatemala? Like and this is, I should say, this is about 15 years ago. So this is before Overlander existed. This is before kind of driving around in your own vehicle was sort of common. And so I just went for it. I just started driving and I drove all the way through Central America. I shipped my Jeep from Panama to Colombia, and then I drove the whole length of South America, just having adventures, hiking every day, poked lava with a stick, climbed a 20,000-foot volcano. And that adventure ended up taking 2 years, which was insane, and I did not plan for that. But it changed my whole life and kind of opened my eyes to what's possible if you want to go out in the world and have adventures.
Wow. The first thing that stood out to me is you did this 15 years ago and you said without Overlander, and apps and technology have completely changed the game. I feel like we're doing it, we're cheating it when we use technology the way that we use it these days, but you did it like the real way before there was Starlink.
I didn't have any like digital navigation. So I didn't even have a GPS or a phone. And I got horribly lost many, many, many times.
But that's half the fun.
Well, I know. And sometimes it was fun because you would wind up in just this amazing, incredible place you didn't even know existed. But when you were just stuck in the big like mega cities of like, it took me 4 hours to get out of Quito in Ecuador, driving in traffic, in like hectic traffic. You know, think of the biggest city you've ever been to in your whole life. Now make the traffic times 10. The road rules don't exist. And I was just going around in circles for 4 hours. It was
my gosh. That sounds awful.
So what did your family say? Like you grew up in a small town in Australia, and then you were like, you know what? Forget this. I'm going to travel the world. So, I mean, what did your family, your friends say when you decided to go on this adventure?
Yeah, my mum and dad, they definitely weren't happy. They were like, but you've got this whole great engineering career and you could like buy a house and, you know, like, and they were worried, you know, from a safety perspective. But I think as time went on and I crossed more borders and I was blogging about it the whole time, they realized that I was taking it quite seriously and I was doing all of my research and I was talking to other travelers. I wasn't just going kind of without planning or preparation. I was doing it as smartly as I could. And now I think that, you know, I've done it for longer and longer. They realize, okay, yeah, Dan's kind of a professional traveler. That's actually what he does.
You've already been to some of the most extreme places on Earth, and we'll get to that in a minute. But before we dive too far into your adventures, maybe we should pull back for a second and talk, what is overlanding? Because I feel like we've been throwing out this term to our audience for a long time, and especially being American. This is a term that's, I feel like, just now becoming known.
It's becoming more popular. Some people understand the term a little more here in America, but it's not what I think most people here know what van life is.
They know what van life is, and they also know like rock crawling. And there's something in the middle that's what I view overlanding as, is like something in the middle where you're traveling by land and going to places that are a little bit more off the grid or hard to reach. I mean, how would you describe overlanding? What does that look like to you?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that for you guys, or for a lot of Americans, it's halfway between rock crawling and van life. When I started overlanding, I would say that it's like backpacking the world, but with a vehicle.
Yeah.
So basically just, you know, when I was in Central and South America, I met tons of people in their 20s and 30s. You know, they had a backpack on their shoulder and they were traveling for a year or two. And a lot of them actually were on around the world trips. So you buy these plane tickets where you can stop in like 8 destinations as you go around the world. And they were staying in hostels and, you know, doing the same things I was, hiking volcanoes and surfing on the beach and, you know, through all the different countries. Basically, I saw myself, I was doing the same thing. I just had a vehicle. And a vehicle is great for a bunch of reasons that kind of aren't obvious on the surface. One is that you can go places that kind of public transport won't get you. So there was a lot of times in South America, I would show up in this tiny little village or some like alpine lake, and all these people would look at me and be like, tourists never come here. How did you get here? And I'd say, well, I just drove. Like, it was easy for me. And the other one is when you have your own vehicle, you can camp every night. So, you know, you've got all your camping gear and you can cook all your own food. And so those two things help you save a lot of money, which means the trip can be longer, is the way I always look at it. So, had I been paying for accommodation every night, I would never have had enough money to go for 2 years. But
Right.
I tried hard to wild camp out for free as much as I could. I just had a little tent on the ground. And then so my money stretched a lot further.
For sure. Yeah. No, we know that too. For us, there's a little bit more cost up front, but in the long run, we save so much money. That's a huge part of why there's two reasons why we really love overlanding. And it's more affordable and we can go for a long amount of times. And we also get to those places that public transit doesn't get. So exactly. What you say.
And I think too, then you just get to spend more time outside. So I think typically most people say, even you're on holiday, you're in Alaska, you spend the day outside and you're in some beautiful mountains or something. But towards the end of the day, you move back into a town, you might go to a restaurant for dinner, and then you'll stay in a hotel of some sort. And then the next day you go back out to the beautiful mountains. I think when you're overlanding, you just spend 100% of your time out in the beautiful mountains, because in the evening you just stay in the mountains and like set up camp and cook and, sit around a campfire or something. So 99.9% of your life is spent kind of outside enjoying whatever place in the world you're at.
It's hard to beat falling asleep and waking up to those views too. Not that every view out there is awesome. And we've definitely woken up in our fair share of parking lots and not so great spots. But when you do have those really good spots, it's so hard to beat that. And you don't get that unless you're overlanding or camping.
Yeah. So do you have to be like, do you rough it? Like people listening right now, you're like, all right, maybe I'm an okay camper, or, I'm outside, because some people, I know it's all relative for what people are used to or, experiencing. But with you, let's just be honest, do you feel gross and grimy all day because you're outside all day, or do you feel refreshed and like, do you find showers and like what does that look like for you?
I think, Chris, as the years have gone on and as I'm getting older, I don't tolerate the being grimy so much. So when I drove Latin America, I really did only have a ground tent. I didn't have a shower. I had a tiny little camp stove. I didn't have a fridge. So I ate fairly bad food. Wow. And at the end of 2 years, I was basically fed up with that. And I said, I can't do this anymore. Even hypothetically, if I won the lottery, I would not have continued traveling because I was worn out and I was sick of it. Yeah. So then when I started planning and preparing for my next trip, I said, I have to change some things. I have to improve my sleeping. So I kind of integrated a pop-up roof into my vehicle. I brought along a shower, just a simple one, but it made a big difference. I had a fridge, so I always had fresh fruit and vegetables. And I had a nice kitchen where I could prepare good meals. And then so on that trip, as it turned into years again, I wasn't as worn out and as exhausted. And there were often days where I would, I'd have a shower, I'd eat a great meal, I'd get a really good night's sleep, no matter where I was on the planet. And then in the morning, I'd say, this is fantastic. I'm going to keep going. I have no reason to stop. So I think you can rough it if you want to, but you certainly don't have to. It's not a requirement of traveling.
When we first hit the road, my one requirement is I have to have a shower, because I didn't know. I was like, that's just important to me. Like, I want to feel clean at night before I go to bed. I don't know that I would have kept going if I hadn't had a shower, but there used to be some shame, at least in like the van bubble, of, oh, if you're not doing van life for real, or you're not overlanding for real if you're not roughing it. And I couldn't do that. I was like, that's a joke. No, it can look like anything you need it to look like, as long as you're still getting the experience.
So, all right, you went to South America, you were traveling there for 2 years. Obviously you said you've been doing this for 15 years, so you didn't just stop in South America. So where all in the world have you traveled?
Right. So then basically when I got to the end of the road, I had run out of money. I sold the little Jeep that I was driving. I flew back to Canada and I had to get a job again. So I just went back to a regular old engineering job, which was a bit depressing. But sometimes I think the reward is worth it. And it's part of the journey is the earning the money and the putting in the hard work. So I went to work for 4 years. I saved up a ton of money. And I built out a big new vehicle. I shipped it over to Africa, and then I spent 3 years driving right around the coastline of Africa. So I drove through 35 different countries, including all the ones that people say you shouldn't drive through. I had adventures that were 1,000 times bigger than I even imagined possible on planet Earth. I just had no idea. Hundreds of times I went into villages where they'd never seen white people, across borders that foreigners had never crossed. I woke up with elephants and giraffes 20 yards away from the Jeep, I rolled the Jeep. I got malaria twice. Like, kind of everything that I ever dreamed possible happened in those 3 years. So that was expedition number 2. And then most recently, I went to Australia, which I had never looked around. I had never seen more than about 10% of the country. I built another 4-wheel drive, and I spent a year and a half driving all of Australia's most remote places. So I crossed all of the deserts, drove the world's most remote road, tackled some of the hardest 4-wheel driving they have, because I'd always wanted to see kind of the remote corners of Australia. And so it was great to go back and explore my own country like I was a tourist.
Wow. And is overlanding bigger in Australia? I've heard it is. What was that experience like? I mean, did you grow up seeing other people do something similar, or was this just, did you never notice it when you lived in Australia, or what did that look like?
Yeah, I think when I grew up, I never noticed it, or it was sort of something that, well, in Australian terms, they're called bogans, but maybe something that like rednecks do. Kind of, you have a 4-wheel drive and you go camping and you drink too much beer. That was when I was growing up. That's what it was, I think.
Yeah.
But now it has definitely evolved to, like we said, people have a fridge, they have a shower, they have a really nice like pop-up roof and solar panels, and so it's that kind of crossover between van life and overlanding. And Australia has some incredible wilderness places that you can drive to if you have a good 4-wheel drive. So you get to have some amazing experiences.
Australia would be such a dream to do. I know Australia is really hard to get a vehicle to. We've heard
difficult,
it's next to impossible. But
which is that's actually why I didn't even contemplate shipping one. I knew it wasn't worth it, the expense and the hassle. So I just flew there and bought one, which is easy to do as a foreigner. It's like really straightforward. There are a ton of vehicles to choose from. A lot of them you can buy already completely decked out, ready to hit the road. So, fly there, buy a really good Land Cruiser for, let's say, $60,000, drive it around the whole country, and then sell it at the end for $55,000. So, you've rented a vehicle for an entire year for $5,000. It's totally doable.
That's incredible. That's kind of what we've heard, actually. And like, I was about to spill into like, this is what our plan is one day for Australia, but I'm not going to do that yet. That's still years away. One day, Australia will happen.
We'll tell you off air.
We'll talk about this another day. So let's go back to South America. This is super exciting for us. I know that was the one that's been the farthest out for you. I mean, it's been 15 years since you've done that, but let's talk about Argentina and Patagonia. So could you just give us your experience in those two places? And I'm asking that because that is the first place that we're going to be in our truck, and we're really excited. I think some of the people in our audience are having a hard time wrapping their minds around specifically why we're trying so hard to like get to Argentina. Why is this so high on our list? So could you just explain to the people what makes Argentina and Patagonia and Chile so incredible, overlanding specifically?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and they are incredible. It's difficult to put into words, but people are incredibly friendly. There's a ton of wide open space. It's fairly cheap, like food and gas and things like that. There's a ton of opportunities to wild camp. And the mountains are, some of the most beautiful on the planet. So I spent 4 months in Patagonia, and I wild camped for free every single night for 4 months. And every day I was out hiking. I was, seeing the stunning mountains, interacting with funny locals in little towns. You just sort of wind up having this big, like, rambling adventure in one of the most beautiful places on earth, and it's incredible. It's really amazing.
It's making me more excited by the minute.
I know.
We're
so excited.
I'm like chomping at the bit, ready to get on a plane.
Oh yeah, and actually, I loved Argentina so much. I looked into getting residency there. I almost stayed and got a job. Yeah, because in the end, I was in Argentina for I think 5 or 6 months, and I thought about staying for a few years.
Wow. Okay. So
we need to lower our expectations.
Well, now I'm just thinking maybe we're like planning on going to Argentina first, but it may be a long time before we go anywhere else. It's kind of what I'm thinking. I don't know. We'll see. We take it one day at a time.
Yeah.
But you go ahead. I'm asking all the questions.
Well, I want to know, because we get asked this question quite a bit, and especially now since we're about to ship our truck over, people are concerned about safety.
That's where I was going to go to,
and
actually.
Yeah, I mean, all the time when, we were in Mexico last year, we were in Mexico City for a month, and people here in the States were, be very careful. Mexico City's so dangerous. You're not going to, just don't go outside, blah, blah, blah. Mexico City was fine. I mean, obviously, it's a big city, use common sense, but it was fine. And then people in Mexico City, when we told them that we were going to Brazil, they were like, you're going to get mugged, you're going to get stabbed, it's not safe down there. And then we go to Brazil, It was perfectly fine. It was, and so
Again, common sense though.
again, common sense. But for you, like dealing with safety on the road and well, what has been your experience driving across the world, and dealing with safety or dealing with encounters like that?
Yeah, it's fascinating that you tell that story, because that really struck me as well. When, lots of people warn you don't go to Mexico, but then when you're in Mexico, the Mexicans warn you don't go to Guatemala, and then you're in Guatemala and they warn you don't go to El Salvador. And we as human beings, we seem to have this tendency to demonize, the people on the other side of the imaginary line on the ground, and for some reason they're all bad, but it's fine where we are.
Right.
And so I find it's a really hard thing to find out what is the actual truth, and is it safe, or is it safe enough for us to go there? And what I've learned over the years is the only way to really find out is to talk to people that have been there, and hopefully people that have been there recently. And the great thing about overlanding is that if you're driving south, you're going to bump into people who are driving north. So they've just spent time exactly where you're about to go. And so immediately you become best friends, because you can not only swap stories of the beautiful things to see and do, but even logistics, how hard is it to get gas? And then also the safety question. And what I found universally is that for overlanders who are traveling, almost everywhere on earth is very safe. People treat other people well. People are kind to each other. Locals in small villages, they have no interest in hurting a person for no reason. There were hundreds of times in little villages, I would just hold out my hand with money in it, and the lady in the market would take the appropriate amount of money for, the bananas or the carrots or whatever I was buying. And then in fact would chase me down to give me my 3 cents of change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was obvious, I was the only white guy for a long way around. I guess if someone wanted to hurt me and take all my money, they could have, but it's never happened. In fact, in all my years on the road in all those countries, I have never heard a single gunshot. I have never had a gun pointed at me. I've never had anyone threaten me. I've never even had anyone say something like, or else, or, something bad is about to happen. And I've probably only met 1 or 2 overlanders who've had something like pickpocketing, or maybe like they had a window broken on their vehicle and some things stolen out of their vehicle. Like that's kind of the worst I've ever heard of.
Yeah.
Okay. Hear that, mom and dad? I think our parents listen to this podcast every now and then. So this is like really affirming of like, see, we're not.
I had no clue that you ripped me off. But you're right. They're just so most people are so honest and nice and straightforward.
Like we've said, common sense is a huge part of it too. Like, you have to be aware of your surroundings, and you can't put yourself in situations that are bad. So are there any practical tips that you can offer us and just anybody else who may be travelers? We're about to head into the situation that you were in 13 years ago. What are some tips that we can take forward with us in South America to make sure that we don't end up in a bad situation?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of kind of universally good things that you should do. And the number one when you're overlanding is that don't drive at night. So driving at night is just more dangerous for a bunch of reasons, partly because the roads aren't very good. So there's potholes that you won't see. There's speed bumps. There's going to be livestock on the road, people walking on the road in the dark with no lights. So your chances of having a crash are much higher. And it is actually kind of scary. It never felt good whenever I've done it. And as well as that, if there are things like bandits or bad people around, the chances of them doing something in the dark is going to be higher than in the daylight. So for me, my number one rule is I just never, ever drive in the dark. The greatest feeling in the world is when you can find a campsite at about 3 or 4 in the afternoon. You still have plenty of daylight, there's no stress, and you can kind of be sitting at camp watching the sunset, and everything feels good because you're not worried about where you're going to sleep that night. The other one is, especially when you're in cities, is be mindful of where you're walking and are you wandering around in the dark? Are you carrying your iPhone? Do you have a watch on? Are you kind of advertising that you have some stuff worth stealing? So I always walked around in my wallet. I would only have about $20 of local currency and literally nothing else. No phone, no watch, no credit cards even on me while I was walking the streets. And I kind of figured all along, if someone did try to mug me, I would just give them everything I had because it was not much. But it never happened. I've never had someone, try to steal anything from me. And then I think the other really big one, and maybe this doesn't occur to a lot of people, is you're going to get back the same energy that you put out into the world. And so when you show up at a police checkpoint, or when you show up at a border, or even just in a little village and you want to buy some tomatoes from the locals, spend the extra time to be friendly, spend the time to be polite and kind, say please and thank you if you can in the local language. There's no rush, there's no reason to be rude or blunt, because hypothetically an hour later your vehicle breaks down, or you get stuck in the mud, or you get lost, or just even you want to camp somewhere because you find a nice kind of quiet spot. Chances are you are going to see those people again who you just saw. They're going to come whipping by you in some beat up 4-wheel drive, or they're going to be like someone's cousin, or like what goes around comes around. And I think when you're kind and friendly and polite, people can't help but treat you the same way. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, this guy's nice. Okay, yeah. And they'll shake your hand and they'll say, yeah, welcome, come on in. Like whatever it is that you're asking for, we can accommodate that.
I love that. So I don't know if we already said this, but when we first discovered your channel, it was early, like 2020. We were home, dreaming of traveling. And the idea of international travel by vehicle was something that we were starting to look into more seriously. And we found your channel, and your channel has been immensely helpful. But one of the things that struck us the best, or we loved the most about your channel, is that you treated people like humans, that you showed respect to the culture, that you showed respect to the people at the border checkpoints. And you did one thing that we thought was so smart. And you carried Coca-Cola in your truck, because it's like this universally recognized treat for everyone. And you would approach a border and say, hey, would you like a Coca-Cola, or would you like some water or something? And I thought that was such a, one, it humanized it, but two, it was just like this, I don't know. I mean, it just showed hospitality, but it just, what I'm trying to go with this?
Yeah, well, it's that video. I think it's a video of you in Africa, and you're going through all these different gate checks or border crossings. And it was, whether you intended or not, it was almost like a social experiment, of seeing how people react to you or whatever. And it's genuinely fascinating hearing you speak and then how they speak back, or, how like it really is interesting. And you're exactly right. Like you smile, like you have your wits about you, and you smile and you be nice. And it seemed like everything was, I don't know. Can you speak about that? Can you talk about that specific instance that we're talking about?
Yeah, for sure. That was in Nigeria. And Nigeria is great because English is an official language, so everyone speaks English, which meant that video worked better, because oftentimes I have to do that in Spanish or French, and there's a bit of a language barrier.
Yeah.
But Nigeria, it has a lot of military presence, a lot of checkpoints. There are some bad things that happen in Nigeria, no doubt. But these military guys, it is their job to keep you safe. It is their job that they're helping you. So when they stop you on the side of the road, and, some people would be like, oh, how dare they hold me up, or these guys are wasting my time. I just tried really hard to have the opposite view on that and be like, hey guys, how are you today? Thank you so much. Like, it's great to see you. Thanks for being out here in the hot sun. And if I had something like an apple, or I always had little fried plantain chips, I'd be like, oh yeah, do you guys want some? And like pass it out the window to them. And immediately their whole persona would change, because these are huge, big guys holding AK-47s, wearing like, and they would go from being like, stern-faced military to they'd be like, hey, nice to meet you. How are you? Like, welcome to Nigeria. And you could immediately see they didn't want to be mean, angry people. That was almost like their facade that they were putting on. But if you treated them as friends, they would just immediately treat, and they'd say, okay, have a great time, have a good day, see you later. And that was something that I guess at first, when you get to these military checkpoints, they're kind of intimidating, and you're a bit afraid, and you're like, yes, sir, no, sir. but as time goes on, you realize, be friendly, be kind, be happy, and people will do the same to you.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yeah.
I remember our first military checkpoint. It was in Thailand. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah.
Years ago, we were with some, anyway, I'm just going to share this really fast because it was terrifying for our first military checkpoint, but it was the same kind of thing where they had, the guns, and it was big guys in camo, and you're out in the middle of nowhere, Thailand. And they had all of us, it was 3 white people and 1 Thai lady with us. And they made us all get out of the car. They pulled the Thai lady aside separately, and then they lined us white people up against a sandbag, this mountain of sandbags. I was like, oh my gosh, what is going to happen? But they were the nicest people ever. It was just terrifying for like 5 minutes.
And they were cutting jokes with the Thai lady, and so we were like, okay, something's not adding up. I think they were just giving us a hard time, but they were just so nice about it too.
I just thought, this is it.
Yeah,
this is where I'm going out. But they were looking for people who were trafficking people, and it was just, they were keeping the people safe. And but yeah, that was our first border check. So for American listeners who maybe aren't familiar, this is very common in a lot of other countries, and it is a safety measure. It's not that country's any more dangerous. It's just they're looking out for its citizens and the foreigners alike.
Is there a border that you have crossed that even being nice didn't work, and you're like, yes ma'am, yes sir, and then you just kind of wanted to get out?
Yeah. Yeah, there was one. So in Africa, the biggest country is the Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC. Formerly called Zaire, formerly the Congo, probably the least functioning country on earth, probably the most dangerous country on earth. And I drove through a small segment of it for about a week. And it was like no other place I'd ever seen on earth, like in terms of development and roads, like non-existent. And the military guys there, they were different. It definitely had a different vibe to it. I didn't think they were going to hurt me, but you just had that vibe of like, these guys can kind of do anything they want and they'll get away with it. Versus in other countries, the military were a lot more professional, and they were more like, this is our career, and we know if we do something bad, like we're going to get punished and we'll probably lose our job, and then we can't support our family. So yeah, the Congo, the DRC, it has the reputation as probably the most dangerous country on earth, and it felt that way.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not a place that people hang around in. It's kind of like get across as fast as you can, and really like, keep your wits about you a lot.
Yeah, that's a huge country right in the middle of Africa, isn't it? So it's, I guess if you're doing that western side, it's kind of hard to avoid that one.
You can actually avoid it if you want to. There are options to go through regions of Angola, which was really safe and friendly. And there's a military plane that some people take. There's a ferry that people take, or there's like a much shorter route through the Congo you can take. But I was trying to be adventurous, so I took a more adventurous route.
You may be more adventurous than we are then. I don't know. We'll see.
Well, I wasn't when I started West Africa. Like it just, the longer you're there, the more it feels normal, and the more you're in the culture and you can sense what's happening, and you can speak to the locals because you pick up so much French, and you have that feeling of like, do I feel safe or does this feel weird? At first, you don't, because you can't sort of sense any of that. But as the months and the years roll on, you become more in tune with the local environment.
That's encouraging to hear. I feel like we have a small dose of that, just because we have been on the road, and we're like you. We don't drive at night, and if we pull into a campsite and it doesn't feel right, we pack up and we leave immediately. Just like you just trust your gut a little bit, and I can imagine that's a whole nother level doing something like Western Africa. Yeah.
So you said that you were in Africa for years. Was this continuous, or did you ever take breaks even in South America? Did you ever take breaks and fly home, or have a vacation, or out of the truck or anything like that?
In South America, I never did take a break, which I think is part of the reason it led to me being so burnt out and kind of sick of it. At the end, I was really sick of it. I didn't want to do it anymore. And then, so when I was planning Africa, I knew all along that I would take breaks. That was designed in from the very beginning. So I did fly back to Australia a couple of times and like stay with family and just kind of recharge my batteries and like rest and sort of organize logistics and like get visas and even just get US dollars in cash from the bank, so that when I flew back to Africa, I was kind of like ready to go again.
Yeah. That's actually something we learned at Overland Expo, is that it's okay. Like when you're doing overlanding internationally, you need to take a break every 4 or 5 months. What people have told us, like get out of the truck, get your sanity, otherwise you will burn out. So that's nice to hear we're not the only ones, because I view you as somebody who's like really experienced and you could just handle anything. But hearing that you took breaks too is like, okay, We're not wimps if we take a break.
Yeah.
No, and I think something that's really important to point out is like there's no wrong way to go overlanding. There's no right way. You don't get extra points because you didn't have a shower. It's like everyone does this differently because we're all searching for different experiences and different kind of goals.
Yeah.
And there's no wrong way or there's no right way. It's just what works for you and what you enjoy and what fits in your budget and maybe you fit it in around work. And so you go for like a month, a year or something. Like there's a million ways to do it. And the longer you're on the road, the more people you meet doing it in various different ways. And every single one of them is valid and interesting. And, you know, they're getting different things out of the experience than I did. And so it's great to realize there's no one way that you're supposed to do it.
For sure.
Yeah.
Have you met people on the road that you still keep in touch with, both
Yeah.
whether it's like locals or other overlanders?
Yeah, dozens and dozens.
Okay. That's awesome. So excited about that. Because people think that traveling is lonely. And I think we make more friends traveling because we're just always out of our comfort zones and you have to be really intentional about it. So I find that we end up connecting more with people when we're out of our hometown than we are, I guess.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk for a second maybe about like, I know that we're sharing a lot of like the really fun and the really exciting things about overlanding, but prior to the call actually starting to record, you and I were kind of talking for a second about how overlanding is not necessarily easy. If it were easy, everybody would be doing it, is sort of what you said. So what would you tell people? Now, we're not trying to discourage somebody from doing it if they really have a passion, they're interested in doing it.
No.
But what would you share with them? Maybe somebody is thinking, wow, that sounds amazing. What kind of advice do you have for them?
I mean, advice is absolutely go for it. It's incredible. I always say it's the hardest thing that I've ever done in my whole life, but it's also the most rewarding. And I feel like there's something there where those two things go hand in hand. So yeah, it is very difficult. And sometimes I describe like regular life. If you go to work every day, you live in a nice town, you're surrounded by friends and family. On a scale of 1 to 10, I would kind of put that life maybe at like a 6 or a 7. And most days are pretty constant because you can have a shower every day, the electricity works, you can go to the supermarket and kind of cook a delicious meal. So every day is kind of more or less constant and constant good. And you're like, this is great. I like this. Once you throw yourself out there in the world, if you choose to, go overlanding, you've strapped into a roller coaster and you will have days that are 10 out of 10, the most incredible experiences of your whole life. You poke lava with a stick or you'll carry chimpanzees through the forest or like,
oh my gosh,
wake up to elephants, whatever it is, you'll say, this is the best day of my entire life. This is incredible. This is 10 out of 10. But then because you're strapped into the roller coaster, later on, you're going to have a 0 out of 10 day. You're going to be lost, lonely, tired, hungry. You might have a stomach bug. You're in a town you've never heard of in Bolivia. The toilet is the most vile thing you've ever seen in your life. And you'll hit rock bottom and you'll like, this is horrible. I hate this. I don't want to do this anymore. And the thing about the traveling is you're on this big roller coaster and then, you're at a 0 day and then maybe you'll go back up and have a 9 out of 10 day because you meet some interesting people or things work out. And so for me, I try to remember when you're having those really bad days, it's like, you have to take the bad with the good. It is a big roller coaster of emotions, of happiness, of everything. And that's kind of part of it. And like we said, it is difficult and not everyone's going to do it because not everyone wants to tolerate those 0 out of 10 days.
Yeah, for sure. That's really well put.
What has been your 0 out of 10 day?
Chris is always looking for that. He's like, give me the juicy stuff.
I want the juicy. Like, what is the worst day that you've had or, relatively worst day?
I mean, there's been a few. I got malaria twice in Africa.
Oh, gosh.
And so the second time I lost about 20 pounds in 5 days.
Oh my gosh.
I didn't eat, sleep, drink, walk or talk for 5 days. It was really bad.
Were you in the truck that whole time in your Jeep?
Yeah,
oh my gosh.
And there was a German couple I was traveling with who had like camped right next to me. So they were keeping an eye on me, but they said if it had gone on one more day, they were going to like load me up and take me to hospital. And I didn't think I was going to die, but I started to thinking about dying. It was like, this is pretty bad. And then when I was in Uganda, a series of poor decisions led to me rolling the Jeep on its side.
I remember that video.
Yeah, and so that was like if I hadn't have been so exhausted, I probably would have started crying. I just crumpled onto the ground and was like, tons of people told me I was going to fail and that I was an idiot, and all of those memories came flooding back. Where I'm like, I've done it. I have to just like take my passport out of the Jeep and walk, and like it's over. I've destroyed everything. And so that was pretty hard. Yeah. There's days. There's days.
Yeah, there are days. There are days. But you mentioned carrying a chimpanzee through the jungle, and suddenly I'm like, it's going to be okay.
Yeah, let's go. Let's do the Pixar movement. We brought you really low. So what's your highest day?
Oh man. Sometimes I think travel is about different experiences. So, poking lava with a stick was like mind blowing. I never thought I would get to do that.
Where was that?
It doesn't even, that was in Guatemala.
Okay. Cool.
And then, carrying a chimpanzee through the forest, and like chimpanzees like picking food out of my hair and playing with my beard. And I was like massaging her hands and like checking out her fingerprints. And then waking up to elephants and giraffes, and you just sit quietly like up in the pop-up roof, and they just like file by. Hundreds, or you're in a tiny little village and people just come over and they're like, welcome, like come in. And even if you don't share a language, they're like trying to give you food and trying to make you feel welcome in their little village. So many times where you're like, I can't even believe this is real. I'm not even sure if this is happening, but I'll just go with it.
I'm hearing it sounds like a lot of your favorite, highest and lowest memories are Africa. And I don't know, maybe that's because you've done it pretty recently, or if that's just because that's what Africa is. It's like highest highs and lowest lows. I mean, you're making me want to go to Africa. Like maybe we should rethink Argentina and just go to Africa. Or maybe we should like learn through Argentina and then go to Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like that was a really good kind of progression of like Central and South America. They have their challenges and they're difficult, and you have the highs and you have the lows. But all of that was really good training for what you're going to have to deal with in Africa. Just sort of everything is like a step more difficult or more challenging, but then more rewarding, because nobody gets to those wild places where you get to see, wild gorillas and you didn't even pay an entrance fee. It's just you out there. It's just you out there in your vehicle, and there's a gorilla climbing through the tree next to you.
That's amazing.
Oh my gosh! Someone actually just told us recently that to walk with the gorillas in Rwanda is like $2,000, and you saw one for free. Yeah. That's incredible.
For a few for free around the place. Yeah.
Did you save that location on iOverlander? Because I need that.
I don't think the gorilla will still be in the same spot, but
true.
Yeah, but in general, when you have your own vehicle, you can just find experiences that are uncommon or that are less, well trodden.
Gosh, yes. Man, lots of wanderlust. Making us very excited. And I think we just needed like this like pep talk of like it's gonna. I know. 'Cause right now we're in the thick of like the dealing with the shipping agents and everything like that, like trying to get the truck on the boat, and it is like we are in the weeds of it. But hearing the stories is like it's gonna be worth it.
Yeah,
it's gonna be good.
It's a slog for sure.
For sure.
If somebody is listening to this and they're like, you know what, I want to drive across the world, or have a very similar adventure to what you're doing, what would you tell them? Like what? Yeah, I know I already asked for your advice, but somebody like if somebody's not even sure if they want to do this, what would you say?
Yeah, I think it's extremely intimidating to just kind of like jump off the deep end. And so that's not what I did. And I don't think anyone should do that. So my biggest advice is always like, just start out small, like head out on little weekend trips, like take the car that you already own, take a tent, take a camp stove, and go close to home. An hour from home, you'll find a national forest or a national park or something. Go camping and see how you enjoy it and see what aspect of the trip appeals to you. And then as time goes on, you might learn, hey, I really enjoy cooking, so I'd like to have a fridge and a kitchen. So then you could incorporate that. Or you might be a person who says, I don't care at all. I'm just going to eat Mr. Noodle, but I really want to go fishing. So bring your fishing gear and go somewhere that has good fishing. Like learn what it is about being out in nature that you enjoy and focus on that and kind of amplify that. And as time goes on, you can squeeze a long weekend, then maybe you could take a week off work. then maybe the time comes where you can take a month off and you could like head up towards Alaska or something. Like just slowly build up and keep having the experiences and keep getting the rewards where you say, this is great, I want to keep going, as you learn what works for you and what's enjoyable. But you haven't had to jump off the deep end. You know, you didn't quit your job and you didn't go all in on this crazy adventure vehicle that now you're committed. You don't even know what you enjoy yet. Like, yeah, sort of, I guess, start small and slowly build up from there.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
Very good advice. Thank you for that. All
for
right.
sure. And that's exactly what I did. And so, you know, the first time I had a problem with my adventure vehicle, I was a few hours from home, you know, and I was still in Canada. And so there were people around that I could ask for help. And you know, the first time I ever had a flat tire on the side of the road, you know, 3 Canadians pulled up and asked if I needed help.
Very Canadian.
And because I had started sort of like close to home, it didn't feel so scary and so intimidating. Versus, you know, you go hit the road and you just jump in and you're in the middle of nowhere in Mexico and things start going wrong. Like that's pretty scary.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Get a little experience first.
Yeah.
Dan, you have lots of videos that people can catch up on YouTube if they don't already know you. So maybe as we're closing out, maybe you could just tell us where people can find you. We're going to link everything down below. But yeah, tell them how they can learn more about this overlanding life.
Yeah, for sure. So on YouTube, I am The Road Chose Me. And I've got a whole series of videos designed to help teach people what they need to know. So how to cross borders, how to deal with currency, the video that Chris mentioned on bribery, like how to deflect that. Kind of a whole series to teach people to be able to get out and go and have adventures of their own. And then I have Instagram as well with all kind of the photos and the inspiration. And I've written a couple of books about my adventures as well. So The Road Chose Me Volume 1 is all about the Pan American Highway trip. And then Volume 2 is my 3 years in Africa. And I'm working on Volume 3, which is from the Australian expedition. So all of that you'll find online under The Road Chose Me.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
Awesome. And I can say those videos are very helpful.
Very helpful.
I know there's some more we probably should go back and rewatch. But
yeah.
Dan, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. And we're very excited for what's ahead for us and for you.
You're so welcome, guys. It's been a lot of fun. And I'm so stoked that I can, you know, get you guys fired up to put in the effort to go down and have that big adventure in South America.
We can't wait to see what's next for you.
Yeah.
We'll be watching.
Thank you guys so much.
Thanks. Thanks for listening to What No One Tells You with Chris and Sarah. If you have a comment or question that you want answered on the air, be sure to send us a message to hello@chrisandsarah.com, or you can call or text our phone number at 423-825-9572. Thanks for listening.